Hello and welcome to episode 30 of The Dive. Literally hours after the conclusion of the semifinal, we have gathered once again to bring another episode. And Isaac, I know you had a special way to introduce this week's guest.
In a world where Papasmithy is on the dive, 2 LCK teams are in the finals, and 4 men gather in a hotel room for a podcast.
I mean, your 80s movie guy is way better than Kobe's Papasmithy. That's what I know.
I thought that there was like a slice of like Crocodile Dundee.
Yeah, I'm not sure what started happening because I hadn't really thought anything past in a world where Papasmithy is on the dive, and then you guys were looking really expectantly at me like I actually had something good to say.
You went on for a little while. I thought all you were going to say was in a world.
over
and over again.
The pressure got to me. I had to keep going.
And Papasmithy, it's been tilting you that we're all saying in a world. Has it not?
I mean, that was kind of one of my trigger phrases. I think everyone has these things that you don't always notice that aren't there in your eye line. And someone's like, he always says this. And you're like, that's actually really useful feedback. I do often have those tendencies. And for me, it was in a world where.
Did you receive that feedback many moons ago?
I'm looking at you right now, Jad. But yes, I did. I phased it out of my verbiage. And then, I check in with NALCS, EULCS, and it seems to be the hot phrase. Everyone else is saying it, so
I think it's
led to something. I don't know
great.
if it's a good something, but it is a something.
Don't you love it when you come up with a great phrase and you use it one time and then you hear it on every other broadcast over and over?
Yes,
and
yes.
over.
My trademark phrase in a world where that I definitely came up with myself.
It's better than your trademark phrase being the gap is closing. I mean,
Sure.
that was never really a trademark phrase, but I do want to talk about that right away. You brought it up very briefly during our cast today, but we're at this point again where we have 2 Korean teams in the finals, and everyone is kind of going to want to talk about what this Worlds means in the global landscape, because we had 2 Chinese teams in the semifinal. We had Misfits taking SKT to 5 games, but it's exactly the same final as last year. So how do you think that conversation should go?
I think a lot of people zoom in, right? A lot of people zoom in into the here and now. We're recording just after the second semifinal. It's another Korea final disaster, right? Because people want to see new teams coming. They want to see new regions represented. But I think when there's the benefit of hindsight in a couple of years' time, in a couple of months' time, people will see that there were a lot of close series between Korea and other regions during this particular tournament. There was a lot of parity. It took SKT 10 games to make it to the final, the same 10 games that they won the whole tournament from the bracket stage in 2015. So in some ways, the gap is closing. I think that's a fair thing to say. It didn't feel this year like there were the unbeatable Korean teams and then everyone else. I think every region, well, I guess North America, Europe, and China especially, walk away thinking, man, if it went a little bit differently, we're still in the tournament. We're pushing forwards, and that's an exciting thing to enter 2018 with. And sure, it will be a Korean champion. That part is already known. But when it comes to the gap, there are certain fundamental parts of the game that I think Korea is better than other regions at. But there are other parts of the game that it really doesn't feel like it's a 2-tier system, Korea and the rest of the world.
And I mean, while I do think it was very, very competitive and it was super, super exciting, and it has felt like, to me, the most competitive Worlds ever, that at least that I have really closely followed, I have to say the argument is somewhat weakened by the fact that no Korean team was knocked out by a non-Korean team, right? At the end of the day, the only Korean team that's not in the tournament was knocked out by Samsung, and Longju lost to them 3-0. And Samsung didn't look that close against WE. SKT did have 2 close, very, very close series, and Samsung did struggle in groups, but it is hard to say until finally a Korean team loses the best of 5 to another region.
And that's where I'm like, okay, we're jumping too far. We're getting greedy talking about knocking out teams. Because if you remember,
just be happy with a couple
Sit
games,
down,
man.
be humble,
Sure,
take your one game and go home.
2 years ago, Europe versus Korea, similar situation with China versus Korea. It was a 6-0, and you left that being like, well, I don't know where the brackets were before, but damn, Korea's way better than Europe. 3 games is 3 games. There were 3 games taken off Korean teams, certainly in the semifinals I'm talking about. And just if you look at the eye test, there were at least games where Korea looked vulnerable. There were strategies that in general Korea needed to refine. So I'm just saying that, sure, it'd be lovely if we were already in the time where, or the world where, if you would say, that there was that true parity, but it's getting closer. Every great streak in the past in any sports, by the end, you could see it starting to creak. And I feel like when it comes to either SKT's individual streak or Korea's massive advantage, it's starting to lessen, and that's still something that people should take hold of.
Yeah, and I think this knockout stage was the best we've had, like up until the finals. If you look back at 2015, we did not have a single game 5 in the quarterfinal to semifinal to final. We've had so many game 5s here. And with all that being said, I am still disappointed that it is Korea versus Korea again, and that's only because, like, it's not that I have anything against beautiful League of Legends. These are by far the two most deserving teams to be in the World Final, and I'm going to be very excited for that matchup when it happens. But just like a China versus Korea final in the Bird's Nest in China would have been awesome. Like the experience of being in the venue for the kick-ass like RNG game when they won in 23 minutes, or even WE when the fans were like yelling intros for their own players. That's going to be missing in the final, which is why I'm disappointed.
Yeah, I mean, there is a little bit of that disappointment because we've literally had these exact two same teams last year. But I really do agree with Papasmithy's point of how these best of fives have gone down. And a lot of the excitement comes from the other regions. You know, specifically Misfits is like the perfect example because they're reaching beyond, you know, copying a Korean strategy, right? Because so far, a lot of times in the past where it was so much Korean domination, it was literally a lot of these Western teams trying to emulate the exact strategies and the exact styles and just being trounced because they're worse at them and they were trying to, be the second runners up at the exact same game. Yet Misfits gave people a lot of, hope basically by playing their own style, playing a much faster style and these different picks that are coming out. Then all of a sudden Cloud9 are also doing this, in their series, albeit, not versus a Korean team, but those are the types of things I think that really got people excited this year.
I definitely agree, and I think that we've seen in all the best international performances from NA, from EU, that it has been about innovation. Even if you think about CLG at MSI in 2016, Afromoon bringing out range supports and changing the meta there, and now SKT are the ones copying Misfits going into the semifinals and saying that they...
Oh, yeah.
Fair? It's true, right? Well, and they even said in the interviews, Bang was talking about, hey, we actually learned a lot from this team. We had thrown out Blitzcrank, we had thrown out Leona as trash picks, and we realized that we were wrong. We realized that there is strength to these picks, and they're learning something from their opponents, and they even use that in their own series against RNG.
And here's a question. Trying to separate the skill of the team versus the quality of their team composition or the quality of the meta that they're playing. Because what just happened in the semifinals is essentially SKT and Samsung both played 4-1 so much better than their opposition, right? Nar was like the quintessential pick of the 4-1, but we saw Jace bans in almost all the games. Like we have seen Camille out of Huni in some of these games, but this was a tournament dominated by like Arden Sensor, bot lane Snowball, which then turned into a bit of a lane priority comp. And the reason that 4-1 like went away in the first place, I felt like, was the prevalence of Righteous Glory and how easy it was to just initiate with 5 people on the 4 while a split push was happening. Yet the finals is still 2 teams that do 4-1 split push. So then the question is, was this just the optimal meta the whole time and everyone was chasing each other's tails trying to do these 41% percentage of your team's damage from the AD carry position? Was SKT now playing the right meta, or are they just that much better at doing this style that they overpowered the optimal play?
I feel like it's a combination of a number of factors, but one of the biggest things to me has been the evolution in pick and ban. And I think so much comes down to actually, instead of targeting the AD carries themselves, more targeting the supporting factors to the AD carry, targeting the supporting cast that enables them to be that powerful, targeting things like the Janna and the Lulu and the Galio and these picks that allow you to be that aggressive and to do these dives and to force these fights. And that to me has been the biggest thing. Like when you take away the supporting pieces, the AD carries cannot pull off that sort of play style.
I mean, when we had 1 week of games, it looked like it would be a team fighting meta. The first week was very much Ardent Sensor, late game team fight dominated. That is really Korea's greatest nightmare. If that was the only thing that was happening, Koreans are very good at late game team fighting. But like you say, Jad, as the evolution has come and teams have continued to innovate and go, okay, well, what works against stall? How about a lot of engage? What works against the next strategy? Well, maybe 4-1 or 1-3-1 comes in. The moment that people kind of got it out of their minds that you had to play a certain way and that you could sacrifice something like Ardent Sensor, that has been where Korea more recently has shown that they are the best at playing around the map, at sacrificing in one area and gaining a lot in another area. And the other teams weren't on their level in that, and that was enough to push them through to the final. But the fact that pure team fighting wise, if you look back at this tournament and say, who were the best team fighting teams? I don't think the top 3 are Korean. I mean, I don't even know how many of the top 3 are Korean teams. And that's even just that as a step back moment is, I think, a big thing to talk about.
Then play that game, right? Who is the top 3 team fighting teams? Who is in there that is not a Korean team? Maybe RNG?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think RNG was the best, like, raw team fighting team. I think WE was one of the best raw team fighting teams. And, like, in the series to date, it's just they weren't able to find.
They just didn't get to team
Actual
fight,
team
right?
fight.
They
Yeah.
were just denied. Their biggest strength was taken away from them, and they were split all across the map.
Yeah, I mean, I was really sad about that Team WE series for, like, a number of reasons. First off, like, yes, Samsung is super dominant, but that was like your 9-3 football game where it's like a bunch of field goals and 200 rushing yards on each team with, like, not a single flashy play for most of the game. It's like, sure, that can be a good dominating way to play football, but it's not going to be super exciting. But then the thing I was more disappointed at was just, like, in the one game where they banned Kazakh's Phase 2 instead of Gragas, Ambition's most played champion in a game where they needed initiation, and it was just there. They could have banned Gragas. Or the fact that they didn't actually have a Righteous Glory or a way of shutting down split push in any game except for game 1, and then just got split pushed in entirety. Like, it felt like they just rolled over and died against Samsung in a lot of ways.
I mean, economic victory was the joke I
Oh
made on
my
the cast.
God.
And
I know.
That
It
game
was-
3 especially was the kind of strangulation that you saw in previous worlds. Like, what was SKT famous for? Slow start. Eventually, they take over all of your jungle. You get no gold. That has not been the SKT of this tournament. That hasn't really been the tournament meta at all. There's a lot of catch-up mechanics because there's a lot of team fighting that can come up that can really set the tone if you go for the team fighting, if you index on it. Really, this Samsung performance was the first time I felt that from a Korean team this tournament, even though Longzhou had some really explosive and dominant games and groups.
And what we saw is kind of one of the reasons why we always caution against becoming predictable in this game. Not specifically just the jungle position, but the team strategy as a whole. And part of the reason where teams like Misfits and Cloud9 did find success in these areas was a willingness to break out of that. And yes, we've said adaptation and innovation maybe hundreds of times within the past, like 1 week or something.
It's like the Art and Censor video on Reddit.
It's like you need to hammer that home so much because that's so much of what this tournament is about. It's been on the same patch for so long that the evolution of finding these counter picks to what evolves as the meta for that week is what is really important. And the surprise factor doesn't carry over from week to week. We saw success in groups with, the Caitlyn pushing, towers down early and teams were not ready to deal with that at all. And then suddenly they're like, oh, yes, as long as we don't panic with the first turrets falling and we saw just a tiny bit to buy that time, Caitlyn doesn't scale as well and there's a lot less things that you have to worry about later.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, WE was too predictable, as you're saying. It's like they ran this one style of comp. If you're trying to only find team fights, if you're trying to do this one strategy and hammer it down the throats of Samsung, it's almost too easy for them to be able to avoid that, right? They drafted particularly well, I think, in the later 3 games. I think when they're playing into these comps, you see them give up the Galio, the J4, the Rumble, but they had lanes that could push on both sides. They had lanes that, as you say, Papasmithy, could threaten turrets and could take objectives if WE ever grouped to take the team fight, and it makes it such a costly endeavor to even attempt to go for those team fights. So I just think that Samsung outthought and outplayed them so hard that it became that kind of hopeless thing where you're like, okay, well, they lost, but now we have to wait 20 minutes from the lose.
And that's why, coming back to your point about your disappointment how the series played out, I actually came out of this series super hyped about Samsung. Like, of all the of the 2 matches, many more people would enjoy SKT RNG. It was more explosive. There were more emotional highs, but I think League of Legends can be, played towards a science. You can really see there being really smart players, and 2 teams just crashing at each other every game for an entire tournament was the possibility after week 1. You thought, okay, it's going to be just Titanic team fights after Titanic team fights. I really do appreciate that there's a way to play the game where you don't have to roll the dice on something like a team fight, that you can actually make the moves. And it's not as easy on the eye, but showing that the thinking man's approach to minimize risk and really maximize results. If you do that 50 times a game and don't make many mistakes, it's damn effective.
I also think there's an element of like this is a rematch of the World Finals, in part because of how much poise both of these teams show and how they actually bounce back from victory in a meaningful way. Like, even in the SKT RNG series, like the Game 3 composition from RNG where they just pulled out Vayne again against the Lulu and just like turned around a bunch of kills and ended up winning. And you're like, wow, they managed to do it. They pulled it out. It's like that was not good strategy. That was basically them almost tilting in draft, in my opinion, going with a bunch of picks that hadn't been working and just saying, yeah, sure. And then they got that win, but they just couldn't continue to evolve their draft strategy for the rest of the series.
And I mean, I think while there is an element of disappointment, from the performances, you also do have to start getting really excited, I think, for the finals, because while, I agree it would have been really cool to see the fans' reaction live if a Chinese team was there. This is the two best teams that were at the tournament. They are in the finals. This is a rematch of last year that went 5 games. And I think for the first time ever that SKT is going into the World Finals as the underdog. I think that Samsung has looked better throughout the quarterfinals and the semifinals by not an insignificant margin, right? They have looked very strong, and I think most people will be favoring Samsung coming into the finals, and we could see the new dynasty kind of being born here, which is kind of cool to see because Samsung has had great performances over the last 2 years, but nothing to match SKT, and SKT has seemed so unstoppable for so long.
I thought that was an interesting take on the topic of, the gap closing between SKT and the rest of the teams, or the gap closing between Korea and the rest of the regions, because how much of a difference does it make if SKT passed the baton off for a year to Samsung, the same, who are coming back with the same exact 5 players? And so in that type of sense, right, they would have that sort of advantage where SKT are almost always changing out a jungler and a top laner.
Yeah.
If they were only to resurge and take it back next year, right?
It's surreal, though. I mean, because I was asked to predict LCK Spring before the year started, and I did my logic, and I saw the KT Super Team and SKT bringing in Huni and Peanut, and I considered all my options, and I said, well, the favorite has to be Samsung because they kept the entire full roster, even their subs, added Haru on. They're going to be able to gel faster than throwing in a carry jungler to SKT or all these players with a lot of like historical baggage coming together on KT and being a super team. So my initial thought was Samsung will probably do really well in spring. They might win spring. But as time goes on, I'll put faith in the process for SKT. Koma's ability to integrate players. I think SKT will win when the year ends. And it almost has become the reverse. Like it's surreal because Samsung in spring were not the team you see here at Worlds. We had Cuve, who everyone's praising as this guy who can play both styles. He literally played basically only Maokai all of spring, full tank only, never really showed any carry, and was kind of a non-factor after really debuting at Worlds in 2016 and impressing a lot of people. It was only in summer that they got things together, so the settled roster is eventually getting there, and like right now, you're like, yep, it's the settled roster. It's the fact that they've been together, but it's so surreal that the year kind of went back to front compared to, I guess, conventional logic, or at least my logic.
And I love the story of throwing this team together because they have 2 role swap players that are absolutely dominating in their current roles, right? Ambition going from mid to jungle, and Core JJ, going from AD carry to support, and being at the top of their new roles is one of the most impressive things to me. And you can kind of see it as well in the way that these players approach the game and how well they understand the game from multiple angles. It just seems like, such a big benefit for them.
Yeah, and just let's start previewing the final and almost in context of like how these journeys have gone, because looking at a team like SKT, that series against RNG was much closer than Samsung's series against Team WE, which I think, Isaac, that's probably why your initial thing is like Samsung's a favorite because SKT looks so shaky. And
because they slammed Longzhu, right? You know, it's like who everyone had, well, not everyone, but a lot of people had as the tournament favorite going into the quarterfinals.
Yeah, and I still want to just kind of like double down on how much SKT has bent this tournament, but not necessarily broken. Like, even as far as when they had to decide who they were going to bring to the World Championship, like the LCK Finals and the LCK Playoffs, Papasmithy, they were starting Untara and they played a lot of blank in that series as well. So we're like, are they going to bring Huni? Do they need the top lane sub, or are they going to do the jungle sub anyway? They end up like doubling down, going for Huni. Most likely, we're prophesizing that it's like, oh, it's because they need him to be able to match up against Khan, because Antara is just going to sit there and Khan's going to carry. But then, like, that's totally not what they've even needed them for. Khan got knocked out by Samsung, and it's been Huni who is basically just on an island pretty much this entire game, winning most of his lanes in most situations and having the rest of SKT play around him. Like, this is so different than I have seen SKT play at any other world championship. Like, they don't look as cohesive to me, but it's still impressive that they continue to not lose.
And it's weird because you kind of have the DNA of 2015 because Marin was a dominant top laner. He was a sort of top laner.
But he was also like the shot caller. Like,
he
it
was a
worked
shot
around
caller.
him then.
They did. And the weird thing was, like, he would overextend. Marin still overextends. I love watching him on Rumble. Free gank, level 3. Kobe, you could get the gank done. It's very, very straightforward. But the difference
do
is...
I take offense to that?
No,
the
you
difference
can kill one of
is-
the best top laners in the world.
And you're
You-
in the LCK.
yeah, that's pretty good. That's
Life
pretty good.
worked out for you in that
Yeah.
story, Kobe. But the bot lane was
But
the
in a
reliable
world
part.
where Kobe,
The bot lane was reliable, and the bot lane falling apart has kind of been the counterpoint to Huni needing to be reliable and causing pressure in top side
Yeah.
because they have been working with deficits bot side that have not existed since 2015 SKT formed. Like Bang & Wolf, let's just go back a moment again. 2014, we had Pumandu and Piglet.
It's going way back.
At the start of 2014, these are the big carries. These guys are going to be great. They fell off hard, and people were just like, all right, Faker's still really good, but he needs a dependable bot lane because you can't have carries everywhere. Therefore, bring in Bang & Wolf. And it was a big success, and they were consistent. This is the first time, 2.5 years later, this is the first time where it's starting to really fall apart. And credit to Huni on the other side in this new starting role with no sub, keeping it together, playing excellent, and giving them options that I honestly think shouldn't happen unless the bot lane can start to play like they did, I guess, by the end of the semifinal.
it's also very interesting to me because traditionally people say, and the classic logic is, when I think about carry top laners in NA and these sort of things, like, all right, you drafted a Camille, you're going to go top lane, you're going to play for the 2v2, you're going to snowball this guy, and that's how you win the game. And SKT has really not been doing that. They spend very little of their jungle time actually going top and helping Huni. It's more like, get Huni on an island and he can win 1v1 if you let him do that. And that has been kind of pretty atypical, I think, for the carry style. You know, even comparing to Longzhu, where, you know, Khan, even when he's on carries, it's more about snowball him, pray and gorilla survive in the bot lane, and that's how you win. So it's been a very different style. But I also, while I think Huni has played incredible, I do have to wonder, you know, you pointed out some of the bad TPs that Huni had
Sure.
and things like that actually kind of open up their bot lane to being attacked. And you do have to wonder how much of the struggles bot lane are actually attributed to the different play style, right? If you're trying to play solo for my lane, if I'm a top laner, I'm TPing back to lane, I'm playing for myself, I'm trying to get the most advantages possible, I'm not covering my bottom lane in the same way that a lot of other people are. So when you look at picks, like we've highlighted Shen a lot recently as one of the biggest reasons people are picking Shen is, okay, great, you're playing into a Tristana and a Lulu and you're a Twitch or something, so it's like, oh, well, we're going to get slammed, they're going to push up. But yes, if you have a Shen, if you have a Talia, if you have these sorts of picks, now they can't push because you have this in your back pocket and you could expose yourself with this push, get killed, lose your first turret, and then the game falls apart. And that's something that SKT has not really had for their bot lane ever in this tournament. It never feels like Huni is, you know, playing towards that bot lane, playing the Shen and playing that sort of style. So that's something that I think, you know, I'm needing to consider more as we're going into these finals when I think of Bang & Wolf's performance, because I don't think it has been great. But in the back of my head, I'm like, how much of that is because of the play style that they're choosing as a team?
And I think that SKT in this current version have been exposed in multiple ways, right? It's not any one point that people are really putting pressure on and finding success. That's actually been multiple points. And that to me has really brought to light one main thing, which we've said on multiple different platforms. But Faker this year, you always consider Faker in his own tier, and every single year is the easiest thing to say, yes, Faker's the greatest player, and everyone will automatically agree with you. Yes. But this year, I feel like the degree to which that is true is more than the past 2 years, like significantly more. That's why him on Galio was so important, because it felt like he was just running around, just patching holes on this sinking ship, top side, bottom side, in the jungle, doing it all.
And he's still winning his lane.
And while being up in CS, with this constant roaming, it was just like, it's really, again, brought the spotlight back to where it began with SKT, which I think is such a cool thing, because we've gone through waves where people even were like, oh yeah, can we put X new superstar from the LCK above Faker? That would be really fun, wouldn't it? Ooh. And then, Faker always comes back and he takes his toll.
Slaps him down and gets the number 1 spot.
And 5x Galio, like, as much as we want to say what is RNG doing, giving Faker Galio 5x, I don't think any other player can get 5x Galio. Like, just putting myself in the mind of RNG, it's not necessarily like a flawed strategy, so to speak, to put him on Galio, because then you're making sure he's not on a primary damage dealer, and you're saying, I don't think Bang and Huni can be the primary damage dealers in an SKT victory, and that was like the bet they made. But as we saw, like, that was the best Galio we've seen at the World Championship, and he's one of the best champions at the World Championship. So, like, it was another way of him showing his excellence. But I think it's just kind of cool to think about, of no other player has a reputation in which you're like, you know what, we need to give him Galio, which he's smashing with, and we're even more scared of what else he's got.
And it's funny because, like, I actually agree with you a lot. While there was talk after the games where it's like, how could you give him 5 Galios? During the series, on social media and these sorts of things, and even talking to some other people, I had started to hear some, well, come on, Faker's, they're down 2-1. It's like, you're not going to put Faker on Galio again, are you? You gotta give him a chance to carry, right? You got to put Faker on the carry. He's the best player in the world. Why isn't he on a carry, right? And so from that perspective, when you're 3 games in as RNG, you're like, yeah, we're doing it. He keeps picking Galio. He's not carrying hard enough. We're going to win. But
Getting Galio again.
It's like, oh yeah, we pushed Faker off Galio and we got him onto the Cassiopeia where he went 700-0. What are you supposed to do against him? He actually just played, I think, an unreal series. The amount of pressure he was putting on side lanes, even when he couldn't pull off a roam, just by threatening, by constantly having the push and always threatening to move to a side lane, I think was incredible.
So you guys probably won't be able to answer this question. Has someone ever played the same champion in every game of a best of 5? Like, not even just Worlds.
I would say yes.
You said yes, but you haven't been able to source one. I need to be.
You're asking this question with, we don't have our laptops. We don't have internet.
So someone on the internet who is listening to this show, I hope, has, like, it's not even. I'm not even asking people to, like, source through, like, libraries. Just like you might remember this one, like, OS best of 5 you saw this one time that went all 5 games. I feel like it is so incredibly unlikely that may have been the first time it's happened.
I mean, again, like, I feel like I've seen it, but, like, I have no
we can't
nothing to
prove
point
it.
to.
I know.
Has Kobe ever had a chicken sandwich 13 lunches in a row, Jat? Can you disprove it? If not, Kobe has had a chicken sandwich 13 lunches in a row, right, Kobe?
I want to see it. I feel like it's someone's done it like 3 games
How
in
do
a
you
row.
like chicken that much,
or
Kobe?
4 games in a row, but 5 games.
People want to know.
A series going to 5 games and the same champion, it just feels so damn unlikely. We'll see.
It's so interesting thinking about SKT because all my mind exercises say this year, this is a weakness, and this could be a weakness, and this could be a time to exploit. Even the good things like Huni, it's like, he's certainly gankable in the early game. As soon as you hear, okay, no one goes there, and he's overextending with a high forward percentage, there are gaps there that you can come in and try to gank. So there are ways to play against SKT that pass the eye test, they pass the stats test. There are things there, and I feel like in previous years, it was always maybe they can't deal with this. It was a lot more pie in the sky. Whereas this year, of the 2 teams coming into the final, to me, SKT has the things you can point to, and I felt that way coming into quarters and coming into semis. And I don't leave either of those best of 5s thinking, okay, they've righted the ship, now they're ready to go.
So while I definitely think on paper it looks like Samsung is the favorite, and I see all these holes in SKT, still I have this feeling that it's almost, especially after watching the semifinals, is Faker so good that it actually just doesn't matter that they have all these problems? Like, is he actually just that much better than Crown that it's actually irrelevant?
That's the Michael Jordan argument. Like, I see so many parallels right now between SKT and the Bulls in the 90s. Like, the Bulls won 3 titles in a row. Then Michael Jordan retired to play baseball. They didn't win for 2 years.
Bad choice.
He unretired and won 3 more titles in a row, then retired again. Like, he was so dominant in the clutch moments. And much like SKT, like they kept changing a lot of the pieces around him. Like he had the same coach, he had Scottie Pippen the whole time, but like everything else was changing in a lot of these ways. So people were also waiting for the Bulls to lose if you weren't a Bulls fan, which is, I feel like, true of SKT as well. Returning to the question of Faker, I just wanted to get that.
That was a dramatic aside. I like.
I wanted to get the basketball reference in
good,
there
it was good.
because I love making League of Legends and NBA comparisons.
You like those worlds.
Yeah, but Faker is
In
that
worlds.
Faker is that advantage that no one can actually answer. So even if SKT has a disadvantage elsewhere, Faker will have an advantage in the mid lane that they're always able to play around. He transcends that level of League of Legends, and he does change the game in a lot of ways.
The parallel I love is of Faker to a nanny taking care of 4 children that keep running around, bumping into hot stoves.
Wait,
and
who's
scraping
Coma
their
in
knees.
this analogy?
And he goes-
Coma is the parent who's not home.
Coma's the one who runs the daycare.
Okay.
Here's one other thing about Faker's legacy. I
That's
want
a
to
good one.
hear what you guys think about what he does to junglers. Right? Because it felt like Peanut had a good resurgence game. He
That
did a
was
level
ominous.
2 gank, and he was super happy. Well, right, like
What does he do to him?
we're talking about his legacy, and you do, in a sense, like have to play around Faker if you're going to jungle for Faker, and it pays off in the fact that you can have a world champion. But is there ever a world in which Faker and
Go
like
on.
Are you guys doing this on purpose still? Like
He does it all the time. I watch NALCS. I hear it.
Is there a world in which the gap is closing?
yeah, anyway, we're getting a little loopy here because it is like 11:30 after the show. But Faker makes his jungle somewhat of a ward bot. Thoughts?
I mean, there's easy examples, right? And you come straight to Worlds and you see Peanut until maybe even the final game he's played so far here, play that style. Kind of my read on it is that Peanut was an approximation of Rock's Peanut in spring. He wasn't quite as vibrant. He hasn't played a Nidalee game this year, despite the Nidalee bans that were in the series yesterday. I think you kind of gain and lose currency in any pro team, but especially on SKT, where you play the scrims, you play the games, you win playing more aggressive. Like, you almost have leeway. But if things ever start going away, the fallback strategy is, well, let's get 2 control wards on both sides of mid lane, because Faker is the most proven commodity in esports history ever. Like, this guy is a freak. If you give him complete information, he will win you the game. And I feel like there's definitely been times this year where other people have been given the rope to be the carry. You think to 2015, Faker on Lulu every game. Sure, he's creating lane pressure, but Bang was the star then. Bang was running around on Lucian, killing everyone.
And Faker played Galio 5 games in a row, which isn't the thing that you typically think you need a ward bot jungler for.
And that's kind of where we come to, is that
Unless
think-
it's great roams.
I think if you're Coma and scrims aren't going great, and certainly the matches aren't going great, and you're losing more than expected, eventually you're like, this will work 3 out of 5 times. Faker getting ahead, getting double control ward down will work 3 out of 5 times. It's the simplest and most elegant way to get the most out of the best player of all time. Is it hard to watch Peanut, grimacing and not being the player from last year? Certainly, but you opt into joining SKT just like you did with the Bulls, for your analogy, because you see the championship at the end, the title you're going to lift.
I see this a lot where people are complaining about various junglers being turned into ward bots away from their natural state as these killer instinct, Lee Sin only mains from the jungle. And yes, it is exciting, when you see the rise of new stars like that and they make their name on Kha'Zix or Lee Sin or, going DPS junglers and carrying. However, when everyone brings up these questions, I would always examine the meta in which those ones are playing on the world stage, right? So frequently in recent history, that has actually been highly optimal as far as the strategy for junglers. If you look at the jungle champions that are being played, calling for this one, it often kind of circles back around to more tanky junglers, because they have an easier way of placing all this vision, and vision is so important in competitive play. Yes, there definitely have been times on the world stage where you've had Rengar and you remember Samsung White, and there's multiple levels here where sometimes there have been carry junglers, but it always does seem, especially in competitive, that there is a bit of extra emphasis on that aspect of jungling, and so there is a tendency towards more consistent performance coming from that type of jungle. And I think a lot of coaches push for more consistency on the world stage because that is something that's really difficult to find.
And I want to give you guys a bit of insight because I'm friends with some of the members of the Rocks Tigers, and the Rocks Tigers were a very unique team. Famously, they were not with the big org. They didn't have as much history in their coaching staff. Speaking to players on the team, the way comms worked on that team was that Peanut would say, "I'm invading," and then everyone on the team would play around their jungler. Like Peanut's movements, Peanut made the first movement, "I'm going to go aggressive here," and then the laners, you'd see Smeb ducking out of top lane to go help the invade. The invade and Peanut's movements were what drove the team. On SKT, you have Faker, and very clearly there are many games where his movements drive the team. So expecting that sort of a weapon to integrate into this team, like I already knew that. I had the benefit of that before we started. It was always going to be rocky. I think they've defaulted to following the lead of their dominant player, the franchise player in Faker, but every team works differently, and I think the Rocks was one of the few teams where it was a jungler-focused team, and there aren't many teams like that.
I definitely agree, and I think to your point, Kobe, it is a lot about meta. I also think that if you're playing an incredible Lee Sin, it's always going to look more impressive than an incredible Sejuani or those sorts of champions. But to me, it's less about the style that Peanut is being forced to play, and I almost call into question the whole subsystem that SKT is actually using. The more I hear these interviews with Peanut, the one that was the Inven translation, the one after their series win in the semifinals, where he's saying, "I'm always worried about being subbed out because I got to come in second. I wasn't as worried. That's why I played better." That's what he was saying in that interview. And a lot of the things make me feel like he is just playing with this pressure that it feels like you don't have the confidence from your team, and I think that when there is that self-doubt, when there is that pressure that's added onto you, some players will rise to the occasion and they'll perform wonderfully in those situations. Other players, I think it hurts to know that there's someone else that's going to take your spot because it feels like a lack of confidence from your team. And my personal read, this is not based on inside information, this is based on my own opinion, is that Peanut is being negatively affected by that. And that's from his interviews, from what I've witnessed. He just seems like a less confident player than he did a year ago. And I personally don't think that's to do with him being on Sejuani or Gragas. I think that's a mental thing. I think that's a playstyle thing that has been kind of put into him.
Can it be both?
It can. It
right?
certainly can be both.
I mean, like listening to both of your arguments, I feel like they're both pretty compelling, and I think it would be a combination of the two. We were memeing like a few weeks ago about like dog champs, just because it was a verb that was in our scene. But that is kind of what ends up happening of who is making the moves on this team, and what is your team composition or team built around. Like this guy goes, everyone follows. They're on the dog champs, you are leading them, right? Faker, it's good if your jungler is the dog. He's the dog champ. But at the same time, Peanut was the leader on Rock. So completely shifting that style takes a lot. And you're never going to be Coma and say, like, we have Faker. It would be really good if he followed Peanut all the time. That would just never be the right call for the coach. And then you conflate that with the fact that I think SKT's double jungler strategy is really good, personally. Like, I think it's a really smart thing when you have two junglers that can come in and give you a new read on the map. But if Peanut's not the guy to be able to do that, because not only is he having to change to being a follower to Faker, but also he has to now worry about, if I didn't follow him well enough, then I'm going to get pulled out. Like, maybe he's just not the guy, and maybe they should have actually been bringing in Peanut off the bench the whole time.
Yeah, I mean, it's a super intelligent strategy. It makes so much sense on paper, but if you're sitting down in the chair and you cannot play properly because you have that worry, then, hey, it doesn't work.
But at the end of the day, check out the results. They subbed in
they're doing
Blank,
great.
They subbed in Peanut. They won those games. When they've subbed in a jungler, they lost to Longzhu in the final. But in general, it's been a winning strategy for them. Does it matter if Peanut's not enjoying himself if he wins a world championship and gets a share of a big prize pool? That's kind of the cross you have to bear if you opt into. You already knew when he joined that Blank would be staying on the roster, I would assume. I think it's pretty safe to assume that he knew that he would have competition for his jungle place, Blank or otherwise. The fact that he's feeling a bit sad, I think if Coma gets a victory, it's still the right strategy.
Yeah,
right?
I'm not saying cry for Peanut. I'm just saying I think that it affects his play. That's just my personal opinion on it. And I do think that even hearing Easy Hoon when he was back on SKT talking about how he felt he played this incredible series, and he comes out on the stage after, and the fans all cheer Faker's name, and how bad that felt for him. It's almost a similar situation where if you don't feel like the team has the confidence in you, if you don't feel like you are the guy, I think. You can say it's an ego thing, you can say it's whatever, but I think that's true of a lot of athletes in a number of sports, is that you need to have supreme confidence in yourself, and if you feel that your team does not have that confidence in you, it can really hurt your play.
In order to bring this conversation kind of full circle back to the finals that we're about to see, and to your point, Chad, of effectively using jungle subs, to me, reviewing all the VODs in preparation for semifinals, the games that Samsung lost in group stages, both games to RNG, MLXG is constantly invading Ambition. He's putting pressure on Ambition from literally his second buff. Both times he plays Jarvan one time, he plays Lingston the other time. He invades him. One of the times, Ambition responds very well, and he plays his defensive Sejuani. He's able to, still farm up and he's able to level up, but he's not able to, create anything for his team. And the second time, he actually starts to crack and makes some mistakes. So if you are headed into this Samsung squad, who has come from a 3-0 versus Longzhu and then a more confident semifinal victory, would you actually open up a more aggressive Peanut and start to kind of unleash that, especially considering Peanut actually came in at the end of the
Take
best
him
of
off his
five,
chain.
and Peanut is starting to smile again? Is he feeling more confident? Like, do you allow for a change in that playstyle, or do you still say, you know what, we've stuck with Faker forever, we're gonna still stick with this follow Faker style, and Peanut, you I know you want to get at Ambition, but you're gonna have to wait a little bit.
The insane thing is, Kobe, I sit here and I'm like, absolutely, if I was the caster of that game, I saw that, I'd be, all right, this is excellent, this is exactly what they needed to do. One problem. We are in this unique situation where they basically can't scrim in the next week, and they certainly haven't been scrimming that style in a long time, you would have to imagine, given that they haven't unleashed Peanut literally since spring season. So pulling it off with almost no practice is a risky thing. If this was LCK and we were thinking of a future match day, I think absolutely you go that way. But with the unique variables here, it'd be an insane roll of the dice. But I guess it's a possibility.
Yeah, I just want to really quickly clarify when you say like they can't scrim. So often at the World Championship, like you have scrim pockets, so you're scrimming cross group, and before the semifinals, SKT was scrimming Samsung and W was scrimming RNG. Like those teams are out of the tournament now; they're no longer practicing. You're not going to scrim against the exact team you're playing.
Who is good practice?
So they are close enough that they could probably still scrim like LCK teams if they're willing to practice against them. But once again, that's going to be like
not on break.
Off-season practice. Break practice is going to be low quality. To answer your question, Kobe, of like, how do you do it? Like, I would like to see SKT start blank because I think Peanut did work better as a sub. I really like that adaptation. And if the series starts going south, I think that's like potentially your elimination game strategy if it really feels like you're out of options. Is just like, all right, we know Faker is so good he can play any style, even if it's not just always the optimal one, and just follow Peanut if he's feeling confident and he's coming off the bench.
Yeah, with how intertwined mid and jungle are, they basically, those two roles control the early games. Unless something crazy happens or there's some weird matchups for, top or bottom lane, it really is a lot about those two roles for the early stages of the game. And I really feel like both of them could, kind of take the lead at any point. If they wanted to pressure Ambition, it's definitely a team-wide process.
And also, aggressive mindset plus pathing of game 1 and 2. Maybe it is smart to say, okay, they controlled the pace. We know what he's going to try. Make the adaptation there. So usually I'm in the camp of start aggression and then sub in the more measured jungler. But given that it's worked once, and given specifically Ambition, who can have those polarizing games like game 1 of the semifinal we casted today, where nothing was happening around him and the game was being played around him in general, maybe this is the time to stick with that gun and start blank.
And also, you've got to say, if Faker can get Galio, there's not really a better champion to play around that aggressive invade style. I feel like it supports your junglers so well when they're going offensive. The 2v2 skirmishing power is extremely powerful because you have so much CC in this kit to lock down for a DPS jungler. Like, that is a super strong early duo who can have push, who can support you post level 6 and even in the pre-level 6 invades. So if there were to be a game for that strategy, I think if Faker can get Galio, why not try it?
Samsung gave over Jarvan Galio today. They got John for it. That was the only thing they were willing to do so, and we got to see Core JJ's like super awesome support play. But yeah, I think that's a real possibility that we see more Faker Galio, and I think Samsung would be ready for it. Like, their Malzahar was better than RNG's Malzahar, and their peel of the combo was better as well.
Yeah, that's the thing. In that series, especially after the way that game 1 draft went, when we saw the second one, we're like, okay, they're actually making trades on purpose here, and they have things in mind as far as the answers for it. The Jenna's in trade and the Malzahar to answer the Galio. Those are the types of steps and levels and strategy that actually make those things possible.
All right, it's time for your way too early finals prediction.
We had to predict on Worlds tonight, so Zale and I are ready
to
go.
We were asked, what is your prediction
Spoiler
in one
alert.
word?
No, in one word, what is your prediction?
Yeah, we
What's
got-
So
the
you have
question?
to be like telecom.
Also,
Galaxy.
by the way, when they came back to the caster room from that,
Yeah.
they were both salty as hell. They were
I
like
was
yelling
not
at
salty.
Shocks. They were like, "Word, give me more explanation."
This is complete lies.
Hold on, what was your word? Did you actually
I
do
gave
one
an
word?
abbreviation. I give SKT.
How do you do it? Like, one word prediction is hard. You just said SKT. What did
Yeah.
you say?
Samsung.
Nice.
The segment was closing, and we
Well,
had to
hold
get
on. Hold on. Okay, like these are all your way too early predictions. I was on the cast with Papasmithy when we went to the desk for you, and you're just like, Samsung's got to be the favorite, and I'm like, nah, man, I predict SKT, and you're like, really? Would you? But that's funny that you're SKT now after
Yeah,
declaring Samsung the favorite.
I mean, I think that when you look at it, it's they are the favorites on paper for how they've performed, but I still feel like it is that intangible. It is how clutch SKT is, and I guess you don't have to call it the intangible. It's also Faker. Just the fact that I think he's so much better than Crown, despite all these weaknesses that have been shown by SKT. I think Faker can overcome them simply as he did, in the semifinals. I think that Xiaohu is a superior mid laner to Crown. Personally, I think that if Faker can look that good against Xiaohu, he can look that good or perhaps even better against Crown. And I think that if they are playing, a reasonable jungle game, a reasonable bot lane game, and we see similar performances from Faker and Huni, I think that is too much for Samsung.
I want to hear why Papasmithy SKT 3-1 Samsung in the LCK playoffs. What changed?
It's a hard one. Like, I am definitely guilty of predicting against SKT a lot and being wrong a lot. And you always look at.
If you predict SKT a lot, you're only wrong like once. Which
And
would be
that's
the
why I predict.
That's like
I
literally
predict
the longest
against
final.
SKT a lot. I don't predict
I
SKT
see,
a
I
lot.
see.
The thing with that is we talk a lot about Faker's Galio, and we talk a lot about how it's going everywhere, and they're carrying games. As I said on Worlds tonight, I don't think you give him Galio. Like, absolutely, you think, okay.
Even his Talia, though, and his Orianas and quarters and
Sure,
groups were
sure.
amazing, I thought.
I think if Faker can run the pace of the game with globals and the ability to take to side lanes, I think that is their best chance to win. And absolutely, that's their best chance to win. But if it's Cassiopeia, which is feared like a lot of his other champions, if he's spending the game at the top, in top lane picking up farm, I think Samsung wins the game around how strong he is. And to me, Galio papers over a lot of the flaws of where SKT is at. SKT can still delay games very, very well, but I think that Samsung play a high engage style. And to me, in the Ardent Sensor meta, what we saw with Misfits in particular was that if Lulu tries to, put down a control ward and stop a Baron going down, one Leona ult, one stun, Blitzcrank hook, she's dead. And it's the same with the squishy jungler next to her. So I think that if you play a high engage style and Faker isn't having the series of his life on a champion who also happens to impact every lane, I think more reliably than not, Samsung have shown superior macro, very smart drafting decisions. I think that in general, they've been so calculated about what they did. It really felt like they left enough rope for Team WE to hang themselves in terms of how the series went. There are intangibles. There is the history factor. There is the what about on the day factor. But they've played a world final before, and now they have an extra year's experience there. If Faker can get it done, if there's something I can't foresee, I'm so happy to anoint SKT as 3 times in a row, and Faker extra the best player of all time. But
extra, very, very
you
the
have
best.
to trust,
Super ultra.
I have to trust in what I've seen and what there is on paper, and to me, it all screams Samsung Galaxy have the advantage here.
Advantage like 3-1 or advantage like 3-0?
The weird thing is,
3-2.
It doesn't feel like a lot, so I want to say 3-2, but then
Yeah.
you're predicting SKT to lose in the final in a 5th game, when the only time on record in a final you can think of that was the famous EDG Clear Love Eve game 2.5 years ago.
Yeah, and man, like this is why I am still, as an analyst, super excited for this Samsung SKT game because, yeah, Samsung went 6-1 in the knockout stage, right? SKT went 6-4. There is so many more holes you can see in the SKT game, but I also feel like once Samsung like figured out a team, none of the teams fought back. Like, oh man, we're gonna give WE like a 5v5 teamfight team and split push them, and then they will spend the next 95 minutes not being able to find a team fight. And you're like, please try something different. If you can crack SKT, they will bounce back during the elimination game with something new, which is gonna be what I kind of can't wait to see in this series. So, I doubled back on my prediction last week. I had the perfect one. I was like, RNG will be up 2-1, and then SKT will be so clutch. And the trouble this week is, like, I think Samsung can be pretty clutch. They've been to the World Finals before. They definitely seem like they have cooler heads than RNG. But I actually put a lot of weight in the Summer Finals matchup, where I saw Faker
Smash Crown.
destroy Crown 100 CS up in mid lane, which just like doesn't happen.
Oh, it was an obliteration, absolutely.
In League of Legends. And then Faker can use that to help Huni maybe win the matchup against Cuvée. I don't think Ruler has necessarily hard carried a lot of games. Samsung has been great. They've been methodical, but I would say SKT 3-2 for those reasons.
And isn't it insane, we still have one more prediction to go, but isn't it insane that the one avenue that we all agree on is Smash Crown, SKT gets Faker hugely ahead, and he wins the game for them, whereas with Samsung, you'd be like, what about ganking Huni early? What about the bot lane 2v2? What about Ambition having another series? It feels like
fully agree that it's the only way for SKT to
sure,
win.
but that's
I
the
just think
only
it's-
reliable way people are mentioning when challenged. There are other ways, certainly, but it feels like
I think it's
of
just the most obvious way because
Sure.
it's the biggest discrepancy. That's what it is to me, right? Like I certainly still think Huni can win in top lane. I certainly still think Bang and Wolf can show up and have incredible games.
Yeah.
I want to get Kobe in.
Yeah, because I wanted to jump in at multiple points during the last ones, but even so, if we're taking the kind of most obvious given that you're talking about there, which is the Faker versus Crown matchup, I've spent so much of this tournament talking about how intertwined the jungle is with the mid lane and with the multiple weapons that SKT are wielding here through the jungle. It does seem like the main way to open up, especially the early game of this series, because if Crown is getting destroyed in CS and Crown is has no pressure around mid lane, I think the easiest way would be for them to then again attack Ambition, because he has been consistently not looking for a lot of early game plays, and maybe that is because Crown, kind of one of the main partners for him to work with for the early game, hasn't been that strong. When Samsung got early game power, it was actually around the Varus comfort pick there for Ruler in the bottom lane, and they are pushing up, and they have a Shen or something on top side. So Cuvée is providing this cross map pressure, and they sort of eke out this early tower, gold lead for their early game. But SKT just seem like they have a lot more options, even though they have shown weaknesses in more of these areas. They also have shown strength in those areas. So that's why this becomes so difficult to kind of run through the simulator, because I feel like there's a lot of variability from even both of those sides coming up.
Bang carried a lot of games in group stage. Huni carried a lot of the games in the knockout stage, and Faker has been consistently solid. So, we can say positive things about Samsung as well, but I feel like 3-2 is a pretty good prediction on either side of this series because it seems like an extremely close matchup.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think one of the points that I also kind of really latched onto what you're talking about as far as, Samsung versus WE. It felt like WE kind of rolled over. It didn't feel like they tried different strategies. And to me, one of the most impressive things about Samsung is how they pull these teams apart by playing the map, by always taking objectives anytime the other team tries to go for something. To me, that has been one of the strengths of SKT as well. When you look at Huni, when you think of, oh, they got outdrafted by a C9. Oh, well, Huni in a side lane on Jace. And Kobe, you want to get in?
Yeah, well, that was an awkward segue, but
Well, I mean, you're shaking
Finish
your
my
hand.
point right now.
You're shaking my hand.
We always do those hand signals, though.
Usually just hold it out. You were popping off. But I can finish then. The point is just that I think that they have been able to play this sort of style as well, and that if you want to put Cuvée in a side lane and you want to try to bleed a team out, Huni is more than happy to answer that sort of play style because that's what he's looking to do as well. I do think that SKT is a team that can match you in the late game and best you in the late game because that's also where they're traditionally most comfortable. When you think of over the years, what kind of a style do they want to play? What kind of a game does SKT most commonly win with? It is that more measured pace. It's them falling a little bit behind and then being able to control the game, being able to make better decisions and take over in teamfights, control vision, and find advantages in the later stages of the game.
All right, Azale. The thing I wanted to latch onto that you were talking about, because we were sitting on the analyst desk going through the series today, right?
Yeah.
And there's this point where you're like, oh my God, if 957 on this cannon just had the balls to make this play, right?
Yeah.
And even though
Huni has those balls.
even though
They're huge.
I think that's the topic right there. That's some clickbait right there.
even though that's a play where you're like, well, it's probably not the highest percentage chance of success, and the windows are dwindling. When you think of SKT, you always think of their huge comebacks from 10,000 gold down. And to me, something that people haven't been pointing out is specifically Wolf. Wolf has oftentimes been really underrated for this team, and then he shoots up at MSI and he has this Zyra engage over the wall of the Raptor pit, and everyone's like, oh my God, give this man MVP. He's been underrated for so long, and he was the one on the recon to make the big engage for their big 10,000 gold comeback yet again, in group stages versus EDG. Like those factors where you always feel like, and all the players will always talk about how SKT is never down until you actually finish the fifth game. Those are the reasons why when you're watching the other games here, we're saying someone playing other teams where you're like, if that was SKT, I think that they actually go for that. And I think that it does work out. So it's really hard to shrug off those feelings just because of the credit that SK Telecom have built up over the years with all of their success.
It's like nameplates on, nameplates off thing that people always talk about with SKT. It's a different game when you realize who's on the other side.
And look, everything you guys are saying is valid and founded. And I understand an SKT
Do we just gang
prediction.
up on you with SKT predictions?
Absolutely. That's what's happened here.
I set it up as Samsung's the favorite to bait him into picking them so we can all gang up.
But it's one of those things where, sure, they have had a lot of impressive comebacks, but teams have been very poor at closing in this tournament. I think there are a lot of teams where against SKT, their ability to hold something like, okay, we've got Huni up here. Okay, we've got Vision around Baron. Their ability to fall back and cross-map has been really good, but so is Samsung. So if it's a repeat of today, if SKT make two critical mistakes in the early game and someone gets massively ahead, who's to say Samsung leaves the door open for a comeback?
Yeah, and I'm not going to switch my prediction, but like if I were to flip-flop, I think there are a lot of things.
If I were to flip-flop.
In a world where
flip-flop,
Jack
I
is
feel like if
flip-flopping
Jack
to
ever
Samsung.
publishes an autobiography, it will be called If I Were to Flip-Flop.
Yeah, but like it's still easy to make arguments for why Samsung would win. It's like they took down Longju 3-0, the tournament favorites. They have completely dismantled Team WE. For as much as we want to talk about how like Wolf has made some huge engages, he was also like feeding against Ignar in a lot of those
Oh,
laning
the Lulu
phases.
game was sad.
And if you get one early gank onto
So was his
Huni and
Blitzcrank.
Cuvée gets ahead in the game,
His
like
Blitzcrank was the most sad.
Oh, the Lulu was worse. The 32-minute No Man's Medallion. Are you kidding me?
Okay, yeah. Why did Wolf buy a Nomad's medallion?
He needed gold.
He sold his spell thief said.
It's all he could
my
afford.
God,
There's
why
no
did you do
2
that?
GP10 on the Spell Thief's Edge.
Yeah, so because he built a Nomad's medallion 34 minutes in,
Boom.
SKT won't win Worlds. But on top of that, like, Huni dies to one of the early ganks. The fact that neither Peanut nor Blank have looked particularly consistent. There are all of those same red flags that SKT had leading into the Misfits series and leading into the RNG series, and they just haven't played a team as clutch as Samsung, as experienced as Samsung, as disciplined as Samsung, that is finally going to be able to punish all of the issues that SKT has had.
You know, you make a good argument, Jat. I'm with you. Samsung.
Well, as well, now that we're on this Samsung wave here, to lend a bit more credence to the things that you guys are bringing up
All
and-
of the credence.
and talking about is the player shots, the reaction cams from the SKT players, Bang with his head in his hands. All of these players after these games, very rarely do we see them, even when they are kind of match point, express as much emotion as I've seen recently this year. Or maybe I'm just reading too much into it,
Yeah.
and I'm forgetting about all the last years, but it feels like it's right there.
This year is different. Like, both of their series have gone to 5 games, and I heard an unsubstantiated rumor, but I think it's a funny story. Apparently, SKT's management was asking what happens if they lose before finals, because they've never lost before finals. They're like, do we go home?
do
Like,
we
what
stay?
happens
Do
if
we
we
still
lose?
watch the
Do things-
finals?
and they had never asked that question before.
They never needed to, Jat.
Yeah.
They're like, if we lose, do we still get the trophy? Is that is that a standard thing? But
So it's different.
So
I agree.
those skins, we still making those?
we still
right?
get those, right?
We made the new
You told
jerseys
us
for
they
the new
sell
colors.
pretty well. I mean, why not?
We're halfway done with the Galio skin right now. I'm throwing out the leak.
I mean, I agree that it has felt like more emotion. Even after they won the semifinals, Faker was smiling a lot. I feel like he is so stoic normally in these tournaments that it's rare to see the emotion, both positive and negative, as strongly as I feel we're seeing it in this tournament. Because I think, to talk about in those fifth games, normally they don't look concerned. And it feels like this event, for the first time, they have maybe believed that, hey, we could actually lose this, right? And it feels like it's sinking in a little bit with them.
And that's kind of why we get 2 great results. Maybe it's not the final people instantly wanted, understandably, but either SKT win, and my honest belief is that when he's eventually done as a League of Legends player, this result here, if they do win in 2017, will go down as kind of the crown jewel of Faker's accomplishments, because with the most demonstrable flaws, except for his wildly impressive performance, this will kind of be the one where you're like, Faker was the only person, maybe ever, in the history of League of Legends who could make this happen. Or Samsung start, their own new odyssey 3 years after they won and lost their entire roster.
Then he retires, plays Overwatch for 2 years, comes back to League of
Hey, I
Legends.
hear PUBG's the
and
big
wins
game now, Jack.
3 more, just like
he's
Michael
only
Jordan.
in the minor leagues, though, for Overwatch.
Yeah,
He-
yeah.
He can't make a
Contenders
good team.
only.
Yeah, exactly.
Never really transitions.
Okay, so do we want to do some final predictions here?
We need hard numbers for people. They
okay,
love the
Those
hard
weren't
numbers.
your final predictions?
No, the
I never even
numbers.
got to make mine, by the way.
Okay, you can start.
It's Samsung,
You
right?
could, you could have
One
said
word,
something.
Kobe. What's
Kobe,
your
over here.
prediction?
Over
now.
here, Kobe.
Faker.
Okay.
Faker
in
wins. What's
5?
the score?
In 4?
3-2.
3-2.
I'm in the same boat. I think it's 3-2 SKT, and I do think Samsung is going to get games where they get ahead and they don't give SKT that opportunity to come back. Because to your point, I think that Samsung is a stronger team than some of those teams, and if you sat Samsung down in the chairs when they're 10K up like EDG was, they close out that game. But I don't think that they're going to get more than 2 opportunities to do that.
I'm SKT 3-2.
I mean, I'm Samsung 3-2. So the difference between a 3-2, one way or the other is obviously dramatic in terms of who the winner is, but I think we're all pretty split. Like, these teams are really close. The intangibles argument for 3-2 is a valid one. I look at, I try and follow my own process, as everyone should, as all analysts do, and try and work out how I think it'll play out. And I'm a slave to the matches and the Longzhu game especially. A lot of people look at that Longzhu game and they're like, man, Longzhu crumbled. Longzhu played so bad game 2 and game 3, but I always try and look at how that happened. Because I saw all the games where Longzhu didn't play bad, all the games throughout the season against great teams that they played well. And I'm like, they've been corralled in a way that I haven't seen before. They've been forced into a bad spot in a way I haven't seen before. And I choose to give credit to Samsung for basically denying their whole play and their whole strategy. I didn't know that would be the Samsung. I was right there with you thinking that Longzhu would be galloping past them in the Korea versus Korea quarter. But I see that, and then once again, taking WE, who are just like, Kog'Maw every game, we're going to win 3 out of 5 because our team fighting is so good. And they don't even get a damn team fight. They don't get a team fight for 3 games in a row. I have to say, on this form, I see Samsung, but 3-2.
I like the dedication. If you keep betting against SKT,
Eventually you'll be right.
And yet,
there,
and yet you go to Reddit, and apparently I'm an SKT fanboy. Because you know what the reality is? I'm sure you guys know this.
How many positive things have you said about SKT?
You know, here's the thing. You guys should know this.
That's the
because
joke.
We got the TSM
Of course
side,
you-
right?
exactly.
You
Of
know,
course you said
TSM
positive
Jack,
things.
TSM this, TSM that. The reason it happens is that I'm always there, and they win a lot. So
And
I
you're
have
like,
to
this team
explain.
is really good.
I have to explain why they won. I have to be like, let's celebrate this team. They were the best on the day. They were the best on lots of days. SK2 win a lot of games. Eventually, people get tired of hearing Papasmithy say that SKT won and why they won. And it's very easy to conflate that as a bias because I just happen to be there every time.
All right. We got the predictions locked down. Papasmithy will be there when SKT wins or loses to either be biased for or against them. Twitter questions. Duarte Carvillo says, ADC meta, low escape champs. Rammus is still OP. Why no one tries it? Kobe, why does no one play Rammus?
Me
We've
and
been on
Jack
the Rammus
put
hype
in
train.
like 100 games of Rammus jungle this in the last like 3 months each, probably.
It's pretty good.
But yeah, he has gotten a lot of the items that he used were recently nerfed. So
On live.
Yeah. On live. I can't actually remember when the nerfs started coming through for like Thornmail and
Righteous Glory.
Righteous Glory. But yeah, a lot of the core items that I would rush for him were nerfed. So I would say he is past his prime now for live, but he's still extremely strong.
Yeah, I mean, like, if you were to throw him into, like, an actual pro match, I think it is a little bit tricky. I think he is still pretty kiteable in team fight. Like, he's going to get the initiation, but he's going to be ahead of his team, and if it's a Janna or Lulu, I don't think he's going to stick very well. If those things get banned away and you're pinched in the jungle pool, I think it would totally work. Especially if they have a somewhat physical damage heavy team, just because like Ninja Tabi Bramblevest with Righteous Glory is just so amazing on him from a power perspective.
I think it's situationally super good. I mean, if you're playing into like Jace Corky and an AD carry or something, then great. He's going to smash that. But there's so many teams that he's not going to be super effective into. And to me, the biggest thing is there's so many supports that just completely block picks like that. Like you said, the Janna, I think that one's brutal. But even things like a Morgana is like truly terrible to play into as a Rammus. Same thing with Volibear. It's like there's just obvious answers that I don't want to say hard counter, but almost that level. 2 picks like that to me.
And if we're just talking about the world's meta, the reason why I think champions like Rammus don't work and the fact that Maokai no longer works is that if you don't have actual damage threat, like if you don't have actually immense damage that, like say for example, Cho'Gath's Feast, then you end up just being lifestealed out by something like Ardent Sensor, which obviously isn't relevant to the live patch. It feels like lifesteal can kind of negate a lot of the power of Rammus, even with the taunt. So I feel like right now, CC is very important and it's very useful, but threat as well is important.
I think another big part of it is that pro players are so used to the old Rammus. All of the ones I try to convert and talk to about this pick didn't actually understand how he works anymore. They didn't understand how you don't max W anymore.
Yeah, it's Qmax and Emax.
The return damage was moved to the passive, and there are a lot of little things that spamming the champion that you really come to kind of optimize it, obviously with any champion or whatever. But I think that a lot of the previous experiences that pros have had and the stigma against tank champions from the jungle, because most pro players, as we talked about, especially in solo queue, they rise to the top of solo queue through these 1v1 champs and invade champs and carry champions, and there's definitely this stigma that you kind of have to get over.
This is would be part of a larger discussion that we don't have to fully get into, but I do think the Rammus point is super, super true that you're making, Kobe, and I've actually found that to be true about a lot of tank champions in the game, where people are like, "Yep, I'm good at Maokai. I played him one time," and there's all these things that you see them not actually optimizing. I know Zyrene was talking a lot. He loves Sejuani. He plays nonstop, talking about MLXG nonstop, messing up the auto resets with the W and actually failing the combos properly, using the E before the alt or vice versa when the other situation would have been optimal. And that's things that I think sometimes pros are just feeling, hey, this champion is easy. I know how to play it. And they don't necessarily put in a million games on it because it's just straight up more fun to play Nidalee and Ezreal and stuff like that.
Also, for the lifesteal point, he rushes Bramble Vest, and that usually goes a very long way towards it.
And also, Ardent Sensor doesn't give lifesteal afterwards, so it's less relevant too.
Next Twitter question, Rishmal Rohitkumar.
Nailed it.
Do you guys think there is a specific reason Blue Side went 7-2 this weekend? By the way, Blue Side went 7-2 this weekend in the series.
I think the flexibility of bans is helpful. I feel like Blue Side is kind of, if you're like in, say, a dancing scenario, like they kind of lead the pick ban. You can decide, are we opting into a John or Lulu ban? You don't have the forced Callista ban. So I think just that flexibility, and that seems to me be the big takeaway.
Yeah, I think it is a little bit more correlation than causation, but I think it's hard to say that Blue Side isn't favored. Like, we can figure out which side is favored by which side is selected by the teams, not even by win rates. And Blue Side was selected every single time in the semifinals. Forced Callista ban is one thing, even though it is really possible to get pretty strong combos on the rebound from the red side. There's usually still something really good left that they can double combo afterwards with picks 2 and 3 on the blue side. So being able to dictate which pool gets pinched, I think, is the most valuable thing on the blue side right now.
There's certainly a lot of things like you guys have pointed out. I also think that Baron is easier to access blue side, but at the end of the day, with a lot of these things, it's such a small sample size that you can't read too much into it when it's just 8 games or whatever. Like, I actually got a couple of tweets this weekend, people talking about Tristana's trash now. Why is she so bad now? Tristana lost all the semifinals games, and I'm like, well, it's also just a couple games.
It's because Tristana won all the quarterfinal games. Is it what happened?
Paying it back.
So, I mean, it's when you're playing a handful of games, it doesn't necessarily represent the strength, right? Unless you have hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands and thousands of games, you don't always get an accurate representation of the strength, and there can be lots of extra factors going into it.
Yeah, that's all the Twitter questions we have on this night. This is probably the last The Dive episode we do for quite a while with World Finals. I want to thank all of our listeners who have listened to all of these episodes, especially the ones that are trekking it out through Worlds. Audio only this year. We've been hauling the bag around. We're going to play rock, paper, scissors to see has to take it to the next stop as well as home. It's going to... Do you want to do it right now? It's going to be a high
In a
risk
world
rock,
where
paper, scissors.
Papasmithy
I'm not it,
Holy
baby.
shit, I'm done with In a World.
Yeah. We're doing
No
it.
more, please.
We're gonna play rock
Okay.
paper scissors
All
right
right.
now. It's not a
Yeah,
video.
live.
Whoever wins,
I
whoever
will
loses,
adjudicate.
obviously has to take the bag to finals.
All right,
Rock,
here we go.
paper,
First
scissors.
roll.
Oh, yes!
I can confirm that Jat lost.
It was double rock into scissors.
Yep.
Yeah.
You got crushed.
I
Smashed
literally.
him.
That's the
crushed.
meta.
So I have to take it to final. We still get to do another one for taking it home because I'm taking on the next flight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the big one, too.
I had to take
So-
it all the way to China. I
Well,
got screwed.
I am the only one who had to pay the extra baggage fee for some reason. Our last
You get reimbursed.
China one,
Anyway,
you had to pay for it.
super league related right now, but I hope you guys have really enjoyed listening to the dive for so long. Do you guys want to say anything?
Do you want to discuss the rock paper scissors strategy? Because I kept in mind what everybody.
Did you guys
had.
collude?
No, I kept in mind.
You're like, let's just both do
what
rocks.
everyone.
Get to scissors.
I remember what everyone did last time.
I don't even remember what I
I did
last
not
time.
remember.
Okay, I'm
I
the
just
only one
random.
keeping track.
What did we do last time?
I'm not giving away the secrets now. I need to
All right.
win one more time.
The last thing I will say is, thank you so much, guys, for actually watching throughout the dive. It's been really fun to do it, and we appreciate that everyone is tuning in, sending questions. We're always reading the comments on Reddit, on social media, and everything about it. So it's been really fun to be a part of it, and I definitely appreciate the community that's been listening.
Yeah, one of the hopes with this show, especially 30 episodes ago when we started it, was to create like a different environment with which we could discuss topics that would hopefully be more about discussion and like less about hot takes of you have 2 minutes to decide this and you're super flaming this guy. But like there's a lot you can talk about in League of Legends when you're talking about the community or patches or teams. And it's been really fun to be able to talk about it in a long form.
Yeah, and thanks very much for inviting me. Please watch my podcast. It's called The LCK Early Game, where we just talk about not the LCK early game. We talk about everything else. So that's my podcast. It's on 5 days a week.
Yeah.
Twitch.tv/LCK1.
I hear
did
you
a
guys are
great
having
job.
your autumn finals in a week.
Yeah, I mean, we might hold it for that time, but every other episode, plenty of early game podcasting.
All right, as always, send us tweets, #WeDiveLol. Tag us all on Twitter. Tell us what you think. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you.